My name is Brian Austin. I'm the head grower at Dutch Heritage Gardens. I've been there for 8 years. Got my bachelor's degree from CSU here in state. Today I'm going to talk about greenhouse operational efficiencies, mainly techniques we can use to save money and make your business run a lot more smooth. Okay. And so with that, I'm going to look at a few, like 6 key areas within our normal greenhouse production. Labor. So that's probably the number one thing we think of when we think about efficiency. We'll dive into a little bit about the hiring process and placement, how you can save time, putting people in the right places. Saving time is going to be a big theme throughout a lot of these areas here. Functionality, again, goes back to people and equipment, making sure things are running smoothly, working well together, making sure your equipment working well, making sure your people know how to work your different areas of equipment effectively and efficiently. Okay. Production, making a plan. That's the biggest thing with production that we can do. Solutions to obstacles that impede production, that'll come up. Crop timing, making sure you're on track, making proper adjustments, being flexible with your crop timing. We'll go through how to make a crop schedule as an example and to see where areas of improvement can be within that crop schedule. Growing, that's kind of the meat of the presentation. That's more my comfort zone. So I've got quite a few tips on areas we can improve, be more efficient in how we grow the crops, methods, how you can use the environment, how you can use your greenhouse to grow both a high quality crop and save money and make money doing it. And lastly, shipping. That's probably everyone's favorite part, seeing the product leave the greenhouse. If you put a lot of time and effort into growing it, into producing it, but then you have big backups and you have a hard time just getting it out the door, that can be a big challenge. So we'll go through a basic shipping model and make sure that very last process doesn't gum you up at all or anything. All right, so we'll start with labor. And a lot of you may be doing these things already, or you may have some additional ideas, and that's great. My hope for this presentation is that you could, if you come out of here with a couple tips, that's great. And at the end, we can ask questions. We can have kind of a discussion and just all kind of learn from each other is what I'm hoping. So labor, it all starts with the job description, right? And you've probably all heard this before, but I still think it's worth saying. The very first time you can make an impression on someone when you're hiring them is probably the most important time. So it all starts with a job description. So it's very important, first and foremost, to be honest in your job descriptions. I can't say how many times I've interviewed people and hired a few people, unfortunately, where the expectation of the job, of what they thought it wasn't met. So there's a lot of people that have this grandiose idea of working in a greenhouse and having it be very therapeutical and just a great time just growing plants. Well, we all know working in a greenhouse is hard work, right? So you need people. You're trying to attract people with your job description, but at the same time, you don't want to waste your time and effort on people that it's just not going to work out. So the easiest thing to do is to be honest and don't sugarcoat your job description. Lastly, I don't know, this is something that I've noticed within the last couple of years with the legalization of marijuana in Colorado. I think it is worth mentioning where at first I was very frustrated in my job descriptions where you post a job for a greenhouse and 10 out of 15 applicants that you get think you grow marijuana automatically. So I would put in caps 3 or 4 times throughout the whole ad, this is not an MMJ facility, like all caps throughout the whole job description. And I would still get people come and say, oh, where's the marijuana? You know, sounds great. You know, smoking weed, growing plants, sign me up. Well, I learned that MMJ is medical marijuana, right? And so they thought I was just growing recreational marijuana, apparently. So I decided, you know, there were a few people that came through, and I decided to see that as an opportunity rather than something that's detrimental to finding labor. There's a huge group of people that's looking to get into that part of the industry. But it is a branch of our industry. And so I think with that big group of people, there are, you know, maybe a few in there that could see working at a greenhouse as a stepping stone to eventually, you know, get where they want to go and work in a marijuana facility. But, you know, there are, I think, a few good people that would do really well in our industry in growing flowers and trees in the nursery. And so I think we should look at that as an opportunity. But again, be honest. I think it's still okay to put, you know, not a marijuana greenhouse, or just spell it out. Just say we don't grow marijuana. That's what I do, and that worked. But you still get a few of those people. All right, so next, after you get them in the door, you've gained the interest of the hire. It's up to you to make the decision to actually hire the person to see if they're actually worth it. So if they're going to fit in your greenhouse. So we do what we call like team tryouts, or it's like an indicator test. So what you can have is you can have a group of people, and like this is our Elipot machine. We're making Elipots. You can actually have a timed test on a paper where you can have someone, you know, your machine's running Elipots. You can time them on how many Elipots they can stick in a tray in 5 minutes, or how many trays they can do in 5 minutes, or how many tags they can, how many labels they can stick in 5 minutes. That is, it's legal. You have to be careful because you cannot be discriminatory in any of these tests. So, you know, you can't discriminate towards anyone, and the tests have to be relevant to the work that they're going to be doing. So you can't have someone come in and say, you know, hey, paint this wall in the bathroom. Let me see how long it takes you to do this when it's not relevant to what they're going to be doing. So, but if you do it right, you have the right test. You think about, you know, this is mainly, you know, it's a little bit physical. You can do tests where they're lifting, you know, 20 pounds or something like that, or carrying things back and forth, laying down plants so you can see that they can bend over, okay, see that the job's all right. It works both ways. It both, you know, you can see how the person responds to the actual labor before you actually have to hire them, and they can kind of be introduced to the atmosphere of the greenhouse and see, oh, this isn't the la-di-da hort therapy, like this is a plant factory almost. So it's real work. So they can kind of get a tryout in that sense. It also gives you a good effort gauge. If they just kind of go through the motions, you can kind of tell if they're putting out a bunch of resumes and just hoping to hit on, you know, one job, as opposed to someone you can tell who really wants to get the job. You can tell how much effort they put into these little tests. If they're doing well, they may not, you know, ace the test and do great, but you can gauge, you know, how much they want to earn that job. So time and potential then on labor. So after you've got the test done, if you're making a decision to hire the person, obviously the next step is to figure out where you'd like to place them. If it's on the production line, if it's just general labor, or sometimes in these tests and stuff that you can see that a person pays a little bit more attention to detail. That type of person would probably be maybe a better, as an assistant grower, maybe you could start them there if there's a little bit of that potential that you can see. So that's the first thing you're going to need to do. And then team growth. So you're going to have to figure out if the person is worth putting the effort into or not. So the whole point of all the tests and the job description is just to allow you to make quicker decisions in hiring process. All right, so next step, functionality. So getting the most out of your people and equipment. Red Bull and rocket fuel. See ya. No. No, so this is what we talked a little bit about before. So now you've got the people that you want. You've got your equipment. So figuring out how to best use your equipment and how to best use the people with that equipment is defined as the functionality. So the first thing with your equipment is the layout, how it's set up in your production facility. You need access to all areas. So the easiest way to gain access is just to keep a clean, organized workspace. So easy access. If you've got pallets or plastic or things in your way, seconds, minutes, those things count, and that's minutes and seconds of cleaning every day because you've got a messy workspace that you're going to have to pay for. So just maintaining a clean workspace is first and foremost very important there. And also the flow. So the flow of your equipment needs to flow. You're starting in a production area, needs to flow towards the greenhouse. And then vice versa, adversely, the shipping needs to flow out of the greenhouse. So if you've got your production line, soil mixer set up in your production area, mixes your soil, fills your pots, but the whole thing is pointed, away from the entry to your greenhouse, and you've got to do this loop around. Well, that's more seconds and minutes that are wasted just spent grabbing product and taking out to the greenhouse. So just think about how your production line is set up to, to allow access for materials to come in. So, say peat moss, for example, bales of peat moss, need forklift access. You don't want things blocking your forklift way. Plug in your peat moss, flows, people are planting, and it goes right out into the greenhouse. You eliminate bottlenecks, you eliminate a lot of wasted time just in how your equipment is set up. So this is just kind of a flow process example. So you have an area where you stage your hard goods material, so you have it ready to go. You don't have to spend time looking for all your material. You can kind of plan that out by having a set area where you can kind of stage it for the next day. It goes into the air, so that's more like plastic, things like that. You assemble your trays, so you put pots and trays together on a line. So you have pots and trays feeding your flat filler, and then you have your soil mixer. Two things feeding your flat filler. You've got your flats coming out nice and filled. Goes to your planting line. Planting line, you've got filled pots feeding that. You've also got plant material feeding that. So in all these areas here, you need to allow access for these things to come in. Then from planting, after that, it's pretty straightforward. You just go in a straight line down the line to a water tunnel. For us, we use racks. That's our main way of transport. Some people use trolleys. Other people use carts. So out of the water tunnel, you load your product onto your rack, cart, transfer it to the greenhouse, and then lay it down. So that's your basic flow process. Progressive planting. So traditionally, how a production line has been set up is just one conveyor belt with, pots passing by, people with their plants here, planting it as the pot passes by. Everyone's probably seen the I Love Lucy chocolate factory video, right? So you speed the belt up and your people, Lucy can't keep up with it. That dated myself a little bit there with that one, but I'm older than I look. So that's your traditional planting method. Progressive planting is a newer idea that was presented to us at Dutch Heritage Garden a few years ago. The main thing that it does is utilizes roller conveyors. So the problem with your traditional planting method is that you're limited by your slowest person on the line. If they can't keep up, then it slows the whole line down, and that's your limit. The advantage to progressive planting in the use of roller conveyors is that it eliminates that bottleneck with the slowest person, and it goes based off of the average rate of your employees. So let me see if I can bring this picture up quicker, and then we'll go back to this slide. So this is a progressive planting layout where you've got your pot filler, and then you have teams of people split off of your main production line, where as the pots that are filled are passing by, the first person off the line just grabs the filled pot, and then the team of people, that's a roller conveyor where you see OP10, OP20, that's a roller conveyor right there. So they just work off of their own speed. So each little group of 3 people works off of their own speed. So if you have one really slow person, you can put them with a faster person, or you can average it out a lot easier by using this method right here. So that's just kind of the visual of how that would work. And so they plant it, and then they place it on the rack there, or you can have another conveyor belt off the end, and you can send it to a water tunnel and then go back to your traditional water in method out to the greenhouse. And the other points that I kind of skipped over, you can take advantage of the machine speed while optimizing your employee utilization. You can plan resources for each day based on the mix and volume. So you can track how much people are doing, how much each line is doing a lot easier this way as well. And so it allows you to plan the day based off your load a lot easier. And then it also optimizes setup and changeover times. So instead of the whole crew, you can have multiple lines going. So you don't need to shut down the whole line if you want to change something over. So that's another advantage there. And then this is just kind of a smaller version, I guess, of the progressive planting. These ladies are sticking cuttings. So you have one big conveyor that's constantly rolling down the middle. And then each lady on the side, they have their own roller conveyor where they can grab pre-filled trays and stick at their own pace rather than all working together. So they're all independent of each other, and so it's all working off of an average speed rather than your slowest employee. So, and I'll say this progressive planting idea was not our idea. We did hire an efficiency consultant, and so they are available. The one we hired was Flow Vision, so I have to give them credit for this model here. You do have to pay for the consultant. It does cost money, but the time and energy and money that it has saved us over time by having them come through and assess our business, and they will be out there with a timer and time every single little job that every single person is doing and say, okay, here's where you can improve on your efficiency here. And then they can redesign your production based off of your facility. So, this design here works really well for Dutch Heritage Gardens, but, it's very flexible to fit, other business models if you're not quite like us. And so, with that, I said it's easy to track. I mean, it is important to keep track of what you're actually doing. So the main importance of keeping track of your production numbers is that it develops consistency. Consistency, average, but your average being faster, that's kind of the name of the game here in production. It also creates friendly competition. You don't want too much competition, but a little bit is a good thing. And then it allows you to offer a little bit of incentive bonus. If you're actually tracking set numbers, you can give your employees a little bit extra to shoot for in that sense. All right, so production. Plan the plant, plant the plans. Anyone ever heard that quote from the great Royal Hines? So the first thing in production, we need to make a plan. So I have a poinsettia schedule here that we can go through. We can kind of keep referring back to this as we go further through the presentation. And, we can make examples of where we can shave off time in this production plan. So, but we'll just start with the basic plan. So, if you're making a production plan, it's easier to work backwards from when your ship week is. So we'll say our ship week is 48. So that's the week after Thanksgiving for this year. You need to know there's a few things you need to know also. So your ship week, you need to know specific timing for each plant and cultivar. So you need to know how much time it's going to take in propagation, in this case of poinsettia, your vegetative time, your time to initiate, when that occurs, and then your time to flower. And then you also need to know your specs, or the size that you want to grow the plant. So in this case, let's say we want to grow a 22-inch tall, 8-inch poinsettia. We're growing Prestige Red, easy, so we'll say 8 to 9 week response time. So natural day initiation date on a Prestige Red poinsettia, September 25th, that will be week 39. We'll put it in weeks. So we know our specs, 22 inches tall on an 8-inch pot, that's what we want. So we use the formula height minus 10 divided by 2. That gives us weeks of veg time after pinch to get that tall of a plant. So if you go 22 minus 10 divided by 2, we need 6 weeks of veg time after the pinch. So if our initiation is week 39 minus 6 weeks, that puts us we need to pinch at week 33. Root in time after transplant, you don't generally pinch a poinsettia immediately after transplant. You need to let it root in a little bit. So let's say 2 weeks there. So that puts us at week 31. And then your rooting time from a cutting, that'll be 3 weeks, which 3 weeks from there is week 28. So week 28 is when you need to have your cuttings come in. So that's start to finish, set times within your production schedule of when you need to do something. So you really you don't have a lot of room to move, so it's really important that you stick to it. You don't go an extra week of rooting. So if you go 4 weeks, you overroot them, then you're opening yourself up to Pythium a lot of times. And then you're fighting that battle a lot. Or if you don't pinch on time, if you pinch week 34, 35, you're not going to end up with a big enough plant because it's going to initiate before the plant is tall enough. So this is the important part of why you need to stick to that plan once you have it developed. And then obviously response time I have based on your ADT, so that's just for just as a basic example there. So things that really slow up production, the two main things that I see are your labor and resources and your space. Labor, like we talked about, not having the right people, or rather enough people. So you need to determine how many people you're going to need for specific jobs. That's very important. And then resources, running out of ingredients, basically. So if you don't have your plastic there in time, if you don't have your soil there in time, that holds up the whole process and can throw your whole schedule off. So it all goes back to sticking to your plan. And then we all know space in a greenhouse is a huge deal. Ultimately, that's the thing that really controls your whole business. So there's a couple things we can do to kind of shift that space around kind of in crunch time. So we'll go over that a little bit here. All right, so tips to help with labor. Traditional method, you're not getting the job done, it's not happening fast enough. You throw more people on it and the job gets done faster. It works. It definitely does work, and there are times in places that is definitely warranted. This is kind of the key thing that I wanted to present today, would be eliminating unneeded steps within production. Now, some of you might think I'm a little crazy here, but what we've found and what we've started to do, and what I think the direction this industry is really moving towards, is a direct sow, direct stick approach. So pictured, these are Cali combos, 10-inch basket. We skip the whole step of liner production on this crop. So you guys have heard of quick combos and Trixie combos, and this isn't to downplay those at all, but we looked at that and said, well, why even stick that in an Ellie pot or a liner? Why not just stick the combo that you want directly into your finished container? So what are the steps that we eliminate? You don't even have to transplant them. They're immediately in your finished container. You don't have to pinch them because we'll go over the proper use of PGRs here. Only thing we had to do on these Calibracoa was stick them, root them in, hang them up, and ship them out. So we eliminated not only the labor it takes to trim a liner, transplant a liner, then you need time for it to root in. We eliminated all that time, but also the materials that it takes. So the plastic for the liner, the Ellie pot paper, the soil for the liners, that those costs were completely taken out. And then I say no need to pinch because PGRs are a very important part, I think, of our industry. They're really important tools that we have, and I think as growers they're there for us to use, and they're very, very very good at saving labor. And in this case, you can completely eliminate a pinch. So that whole point of the labor. This is Calibracoa. There's, in my opinion, there's absolutely no reason to pinch a Calibracoa anymore. Same with, yeah. From what? So, yeah, the question was, how do we prevent the seedlings or cuttings from rotting out in a big mass of soil? You do need to be a lot more aware of how much mist you're putting on in production. You don't want to over mist them, and you need to have the capability to do this as well. So you have to have a large, we're not out there by hand misting. You need to have some sort of automation, either booms or a big misting zone. But yes, You just have to dial down your mist time and realize that you're actually pulling up more water, more evaporation from the big mass of soil, and it actually saves, if you have a motion error on a boom, anyone that's got booms where your boom just quits working, it's kind of like a worst nightmare where you leave for the night, you come in and all your cuttings are fried up. This actually saves the cuttings because you have a better microclimate with that big mass of soil. Does that make sense? Okay. So this is more examples of a direct stick combo. This is multi-genus, so this is petunias, verbena, calibrachoa, Lysimachia, you can, lobelia, no problem. You can do all this stuff, no pinch, direct stuck. This is what we have going on right now at Dutch Heritage Gardens. So you can see the small little cutting in that big mass of soil. You just have to teach and be aware that you don't over mist them. But at the same time, it's a large area. So calibrachoa, they need a lot more water initially until they get callus. Ivy geranium, that's on the left there. That's one where, you know, the leaf has so much water, it's almost like a succulent. You get that leaf hydrated, you can cut the mist out really, really fast. And so if you're leaning more on the drier side, I mean, you definitely use fungicides too. That is definitely part of the rotation still, but it's working really well. Other tips to help with space. So anyone ever heard the term load leveling? It's kind of just a fancy little thing. Mainly a method for reducing large fluctuations that occur in demand. So by storing excess plant material during periods of low demand for use in high demand. So the problem that we run into, even with this direct stick, is when you get in the heat of production, say week 14 through week 18, right in the middle of the season there, you're always running into backups because you're always running out of space at that time. And I'm not saying direct stick works during that time. It definitely doesn't. So the other thing I forgot to mention is direct stick only works when you have that space available. So early in the season or late in the season. You don't want to be doing direct stick in the middle of the season because you're going to use up all your space on a couple of different crops. So that's where liners are more effective because you can condense your space like that. Another thing to help out with that is use another greenhouse's space during peak production. So I'm not saying let's go down to Altman's and use their space and stick a bunch of plants in there and grab them when we need them. I'm saying that's more of a way of saying buy your plant material in instead of producing it during your peak time. So if you know you're going to run into a traffic jam week 15 with space, and your production is already 1 or 2 weeks backed up, just have it planned to buy that material in. And that is in essence using that other greenhouse's space, letting them grow the plug, then you buy it in, all you got to do is plant it up. Number 2 is use of a cooler. I don't know if a lot of people, this takes like a big cooler. We grow a lot of Dutch bulbs, so we have a big cooler and cooler space available at that time. But that's with the load leveling. You can produce your product before you actually need it, earlier while your demand is low, and then store it in a cooler when you run out of space. So this works really well for most plugs, a lot of plugs. If you can keep your cooler at 33, 34 degrees, what we do is, you know, if we've got an excess of petunia plugs, we just load them up on racks, no light, stick them in the cooler at 33 degrees, and then, you know, they'll hold 2, 3, 4 weeks, whatever you need at that temperature, and then we just pull them out as needed. What's that? With no light. So that's the key, is that temperature though, 33, 34. If you get above, if you're not able to hold that temperature and you get 38, 39, 40 degrees, then they're going to stretch because you don't have light. Okay, so crop timing. Another favorite of my Royal Highness quotes. Time is a poor grower's friend and a good grower's worst enemy. If you think about that one a little bit, that's if you're a good grower and you're sticking to the plan, you don't need a lot of extra time. But if you're not doing a good job growing your crop, trying to fix it, extending it, you've got a lot of time. Okay, I've got a lot of time to fix the crop. That's kind of what that quote means. 4 don'ts of crop timing. So time spent doctoring poor quality plants. So a lot of us as growers, that's just what we do, right? We get attached, we get connected to our plants, and you just want to fix them. And that's not efficient to spend time fixing poor quality plants. The efficient thing to do is to recognize that that's a problem crop and get rid of it before you spend too much time and energy on it. So we have another saying, your first loss is your cheapest loss. So if you say you go back to poinsettias, you've got a crop of poinsettias where you've got pythium on them in 3 weeks, and you're just battling that pythium and you're doing fungicides every week, and then you plant them, and then it spreads to the rest of your healthy stuff and in the rest of your crop. I mean, you're just battling that thing the whole season. Well, if you just would have chose to pitch them instead of working on fixing them up from the get-go, you just eliminate that headache. Yeah, you take a little bit of loss on the cuttings, but compared to all the fungicides and all the fixing that you had to do down the road, the cheapest, more efficient way is just to get rid of them early. Programming safety nets. So that goes a lot towards not trusting your growers. When you program a safety net into a production crop. So if you say, a petunia seed plug, should take about 6 weeks to grow out, and 240 cells, what we do. If you're programming 8 weeks, it should take 6 weeks, but you say, I don't think my grower is going to have a good one that we can pull out, so I'm just going to give them an extra 2 weeks. That's called a safety net. It's just a waste of time. Holding product. So if you don't have a cooler, this goes towards sticking to the plan. If you're holding product, it gets stretchy on you. Scissors are still the only PGR we have that'll actually shrink a plant. But if it's something that you can't pinch, then you're dealing with a stretchy plant the whole rest of the time. So just another way to stress it's really important to stick to the plan. And then just don't wing it. Use your resources. There's a lot of resources out there. Probably every company that sells you product, be Ball, Griffin, all those companies, they've got some form of tech support. So if you don't know all the finer details about programming a crop, there's tons of info out there. So do your research early. Use those resources. And then being able to make the proper adjustments. So with this direct stick and direct sow at our greenhouse, when we were first implementing it and we're going back and forth between it, you need to double check your crop notes. Direct stick, direct sow, you're able to eliminate that whole 2 weeks of rooting in time. But if you leave that in on your production sheet, then you've just got a wasted 2 weeks. And what you end up with is a huge plant because you said, it's timed out for week 33. I followed the schedule, but you're going based off of your liner production schedule and not your direct stick schedule. So that's where you can run into problems. Now, with that extra time that we have taken out by direct stick, you don't have the rooting in time. you're gaining 2 weeks. So with that 2 weeks, what are you going to do with that extra 2 weeks? Well, you can either extend a crop into that 2 weeks and start a crop later so you don't need it, or you can decrease the number of inputs in your pots and utilize that extra 2 weeks just to grow a bigger plant. So you've gained 2 weeks, but you can decrease your inputs. So that's another way to save money. This is an 8-inch mum right here. 1 input, direct stick, no pinch. And there's additional time on that plant right there, but it's only because of the number of inputs. You're still growing it to its maximum potential and saving money because you're not having to put 2 more quarters, 2 more inputs in that pot. So right up front, that's 50-cent savings. And then I say flexibility. You do need to be able to make adjustments on the fly on some, sometimes when something doesn't work out. If you don't stick to the plan, you get up to a certain point, there's, not to say you should just toss the whole crop. Once you get to a certain point, you just need to, sometimes you do need to stay flexible. Okay, so here we go, growing. Tips and tricks to grow more effectively and efficiently. 4 key areas of improvement here. Spacing. We'll go over a few new ideas in using space in terms of placing product out in the greenhouse at final space or traditional pot tight, bump them up again, and just kind of expand your space as you go. Aisleways, benches versus growing on the floor. These are key points where we can save space. And then also hanging space. If you guys, I don't know how many grow hanging baskets here, but there's some pretty specific ways that you can save on the way that you even hang your baskets. Methods, we'll talk about fertilizer regimen, PGRs, temperature, using your greenhouse environment to best fit the crops that you're growing. Labor, again, we'll go over that, and actual grow labor, and then crops, doing a good crop analysis. What are you good at growing? What's worth growing? What's not worth growing? Okay, so spacing. You can see this spacing here on the picture. Might look a little weird. It's not your traditional, set them all down in the greenhouse pot tight with a little aisle. They can go, and then you come in and space them into an empty bay later. This spacing here is set up to do a couple different things. One, in just terms of fertilizer use. So, every bay at Dutch Heritage Gardens, we've got booms we can use. These plants are set up like this, so you only use half of a bar of the boom. So what it costs to water a bay of plants, 1 bay each time you water, just in the fertilizer, based off of 18 nozzles on a full run boom, be about $15. Times 3 bays is $45. If you cut the number of nozzles that you're using on that boom in half, you cut that fertilizer cost in half. So every time you water those 3 bays, instead of costing you $45, it's only going to cost you $22.50. Every time you water. So every time you water those plants, you're saving $20. So there's a little savings just because they're set up and spaced like that. The other reason they're spaced like that is because they are preset to be easy to space when you actually do need to space them. So, they're in, it's hard to see in the picture, but they're in, lines of 6, So all my crew has to do is come in and take out every other line, line it up with the existing lines, and space the pots out. So it maybe be a 2-3 hour job with a couple of people by pre-setting it, rather than having to put them all pot tight, fill in the entire bay, having to pick up half the crop, move it to a whole different zone of the greenhouse. So you don't have to take that time of moving it through the greenhouse and of picking it up. It's already right there, ready to go when you need to have it. Heat versus labor. So this is the other thing. A lot of people will, you're saying, well, in the cold months right now, you're using up all your greenhouse space. You're having to heat this large zone early, right? If you put it all together in one area, you could consolidate your greenhouse zones and only have to heat a little portion instead of having to open up bigger areas. And I'll say heat is right now cheaper than labor. And with the minimum wage in Colorado just going up to, it's going to be changing to $12 an hour. And with gas prices right now, this is the smart thing to do, is to use your heat before you use your labor. And then cost of handling too. So every time we have this saying in the greenhouse, this is a Van Wingerden thing. Every time you touch a plant, it costs $0.25. So every time you have to pick up a plant and space it and then respace it and pick it up and trim it, if you think about it, it really does cost $0.25. So if you've got small margins like we do, selling to box stores or grocery chains or anything like that, every time you touch a plant or every time you don't have to touch a plant can make a big difference in your margin. If you're only making $0.25 on a 4-inch pot, but you have to touch it 2 times, and you're losing money on it already. And then we already touched on this a little bit, but the time of year is dependent on how you can use it too. So with the Drick stick, obviously it's not gonna work in the heat of the season. You got to use your space when you have it then, and we're growing things in the aisles and the walls by then anyways. So, but early in the season, this works well. Late in the season, this works well, when you have the space available. All right, so basket rotation and basket hanging. 4 things about that. With hanging baskets, you want to avoid immediate maximums. So if you've got a big area to hang baskets, you don't just want to go in one area, max hang here. So how we have it set up is we have Echo basket systems. You can hang 2 layers of baskets on each system. You don't just want to start in one zone and full hang the top, full hang the bottom, and just go through the greenhouse. That's what we call an immediate maximum. You want to time your shipping with the space available. So you want to spread your baskets out as you hang them. So then when you need the space, you have it constantly becoming available by pulling down baskets that are ready. And that's giving you like a rotational space instead of going back and max hanging here and just going through the numbers there. Obviously this is a good rule, but it's something that I've made mistakes on before. I think we all have, but don't hang over highlight crops. There's some of the early things we've got going, seed geraniums, zonal geraniums, things that need a lot of light. It's not a great idea to use that area specifically as where you're going to hang your baskets. So what we do at Dutch Heritage is we avoid at all costs hanging over those specific crops that need high light. We wait as long as possible on that. And then you want to hang according to habit. So if we look at this picture here, you can see we've got Calibrachoa baskets hung with zonal geranium baskets. So, and then they're alternated. So you've got a very trailing habit type plant hung, and then you're alternating it with an upright. So And then the baskets are also alternating hooks. So you're not just, at one time, you're not completely blotting out the sun for what's on the bottom. So if you just put all your callies on one end of the greenhouse, you're going to have a very, very shady end of the greenhouse because they're all going to, it's all trailing, it's all going to block it out. But by alternating trailing with a very upright plant, like the zonal geraniums, then you can allow more light to come through on the bottom. So I could talk probably the whole time about methods and fertilizer and stuff. I'll just touch a little bit briefly on this. The fertilizer regimen, by having a constant feed versus a pulse feeding system, it eliminates, it simplifies the program, less chance of error. Also eliminates guesswork of your growers. So they're putting the same feed on the plants all the time. Really consolidates that program, makes it a lot easier. PGRs, I already touched on a little bit, but they're a very important tool to use. Temperature, using your greenhouse, if you've got a cold zone versus a hot zone, putting the right crops in those zones, very important. Also, if you've got fan and pads, that kind of cooling at your greenhouse, we have open roof cooling. But if you've got fan and pads, you know that at the pad end of the greenhouse is your cool end, at the fan end of the greenhouse is your hot end. A quick way to fix that, you can put up plastic to force the air down below, especially if you've got benches. You put your plastic initially up high, so it forces air below the benches, and then you put some plastic walls up, maybe 3 spots throughout the house, where it would force the cold air. The fans will pull the cold air up above the benches, and then the cold air will drop. Then it'll hit your other barrier, pull it up above, then it will drop, and then the fans will pull it up. So that creates a much more even gradient if you've got pads and fans that way. Then you don't have a cool end and a hot end. It's even across the board. And then lighting, LEDs work really well. You can even develop custom spectrums now with those LEDs. 1,000-watt high-pressure sodium bulb. You can get the same output with an LED with only 120 watts, I think. So another key thing to look at, I think, is a good idea. So then labor, automation. We're fully automated, Dutch Heritage Gardens. There's other ways that you can automate your greenhouse besides upgrading your entire greenhouse. We've seen hedge trimmers set up on a conveyor belt, make your own trimmer, or double use. So if you can see in this picture, anyone point out the heat pipes in this picture? It would be the boom rails. So the boom rails are also my heat pipes. So they're 2 uses, double use. Let's keep going here. So here's more automation trolleys. This is just a little trolley we've set up to gain access to our basket systems. The slides, conveyors, very useful in the greenhouse if you can't take racks to your product. Monitoring. So I think we all know the importance of using sticky cards to monitor pests. It's a very efficient way to know what's going on, but also using crop cards. The main thing you gain from using crop cards is you can tell what's been done to the crop, but it also allows you to remember what's been done year to year, and so you can develop consistency. If you have something that works really well, you can see exactly what you did, when you did it, record it, and then you can repeat that the next year. Or if you have something that doesn't work, you can always review and say, okay, I don't think you can make the proper adjustments that way. Trialing. So it's also, I think, important for greenhouses. You can do your own in-house trials. Don't wait for someone else to do the trials for you. This is just some bulbs that we have. We're just trying out different PGR rates. So you can do a bunch of research, but by doing your own in-house trials, a lot of times it's free. People give you free plants to do trials with. Just do it yourself, and you can see what works, and you can really manipulate the trial, or not really manipulate the trial, but you don't have to weed through a lot of stuff that you don't want to know. You can really gear it towards knowing exactly what you want to know, what PGR works best. And then real quick, knowing your regional demand here in Colorado. If you're not growing a blue and white columbine, you're crazy, because that's a state flower. Small batch crops, is it really worth growing 3 trays of ranunculus? If you have an order for a ranunculus or something, probably easier just to buy that in. And also identifying high overhead, challenging crops. This goes back to using your resources. There's a lot of other greenhouses in the state that are very good at, every greenhouse has their favorite crops. So challenging perennials for us is one thing that I will source out to, say, Gully or Center. Greenhouses that are really good at growing perennials and difficult to germinate or difficult to propagate perennials. I'll just let them do the hard work, and then I'll buy it in and save the headache. All right, shipping, just the flow of shipping. You have orders, shipping material, staging, building, so in our case, racks. Picking, so picking stuff up, staging the trucks, and then loading it up. So here's another slide about shipping, where orders are released. Your master pull is released to the crew, straight pull from the greenhouse or rack stripe in the greenhouse specifically. They all go to a supermarket stage. That's really a key part to pulling orders, big orders especially. Pick the orders, stage the trucks, and load the trucks. Assigning pulling zones, I think, is a good key here. You reduce the movement of employees, so you don't have a bunch of people running around like chickens with their head cut off looking for product. You increase the familiarity of specific people in that pulling zone, so they know what's in there, they know what's ready, and they know what's good quality in their zone specifically. And you save a lot of time because you cut down on that movement of people just looking for stuff. They already know what's in there. So this is just kind of an example of how you would split it up. And you have a crew, for zone 2 or zone 1. If you're not pulling something out of zone 2 for one order, you can use that crew to zone 1 and say, okay, this is the crew that's in charge of zone 1. Refer to them. They know where stuff is. Listen to them. So it's real easy to move people around in that sense. And then lastly, supermarket staging ensures order accuracy. It's kind of like the final quality control checkpoint. You guys know what I'm talking about when I say supermarket staging. So it's like a supermarket. You have everything all in one area. So you got your potatoes here, your apples here, your onions here. And so every different order, in our case, we have racks, and we have rack A, rack B, rack C. They have areas where they place those, and then my truck loaders and people, they will pick from those specific areas rather than pulling a specific truck one at a time. We'll just make a block of rack A, make a block of rack B, block of rack C, and it just takes 1 or 2 people to just pull a rack from there. I need 2 of these, I need 1 of these, just like at the supermarket. Again, it minimizes movement, saves a lot of time, and it's kind of like the final stage where you can check for problems. So that's my presentation, right at 4 o'clock, perfect, 60 minutes. Any questions real quick? All right, thank you very much. We do have an open house at Dutch Heritage Gardens. We're down in Larkspur, Colorado, every Memorial Day weekend. So if any of you guys want to come down, see our automation, see our greenhouse and how things work, we're open to the public every Memorial Day weekend. So just thought I'd throw that out there. But thank you very much.